Hey traders, welcome to Charts and Coffee. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope everyone's having a good morning and the week is off to a good start. We have an interesting week in that there is some data that could be needle movers this week. So let's kick off everything with a look at the economic calendar. Now, whatever economic calendar you like is great. This is Forex Factory, and throughout today, in fact, starting at 3 a.m. this morning, we've already heard from FOMC member Waller. Daily's up later on. It's just a constant and steady stream of FOMC members throughout the week. You can see Bowman on Tuesday. Again, so much to say, she's got to speak twice. So it's going to be that kind of week. And remember, we're going into end of quarter next week. So if you take a look at the week in between all the FOMC members, we happen to be getting final GDP on Thursday, and then core PCE, which is the pet inflation number for the Federal Reserve on Friday. So who knows? They might be trying to get out in front of this thing, no telling. But if that expectation for September, November, and December quarter point cuts, or even just November, December quarter point cuts is to hold, it's right now, it's higher probability. That core PC has got to come in at least flat, if not slightly cooler. And that's where we sit. And if we think about, oh my gosh, there's another Bowman. Oh, wow. So there you go. So that just gives you an idea of the FOMC events we have coming at us on top of two pretty important data events. GDP is not as important as one would think. It used to be a really important number. The growth hasn't been a message altering event for the Federal Reserve. Inflation certainly is. Jobs certainly are. And in fairness to the Federal Reserve, they have a dual mandate, and growth is not one of them. It's jobs and inflation. So take a look at that economic calendar. That is what we have coming up this week. Shan't be boring. We're coming into the tail end of, well, I should say the first day of OPEX is done. And we're looking at the NASDAQ and the XLK, Apple, and NVIDIA as the rebalancing is also done. And ultimately, what we want to remember about rebalancing is that, we never want to expect a reaction. As my first sensei used to say, never expect an anatomical reaction, right? I was learning jiu-jitsu at the time. And that was always the lesson, right? You're going to learn these moves, but you have to observe actually what's happening. Just don't expect this or that to happen. And interestingly enough, on the day that NVIDIA has to be bought to the tune of about $10 billion, it gapped down. It's still pretty darn weak. So we want to keep in mind that the rebalancing is done, but there's still a little bit of heaviness happening in the broader averages. Apple is not a surprising one. I didn't, in terms of how much lower we go, we'll take a look at it maintaining support at or above the 21 propulsion, which are the green dots you can see here on this chart. But for the most part, let's also step back and remember that if we're looking at a 5-minute chart, if we're looking at a 1-hour chart, we can get a little bit too much short-term time frame tunnel vision. And that we want to make sure that even if we are a little bit lower this morning, we're not lower than we were on Friday as of right now. We're just lower than the close. So a little bit of heaviness in the broader averages, but this is still an uptrending NASDAQ. All right, so let's get to the questions. First up is, what is our first question? There we go. How do I feel about the pullback in BTC? Well, I never want to feel anything about the market. I just want to trade what I see, right? So if I take a look at what's going on with Bitcoin, I'm not really looking at Bitcoin all that much at the moment. Let me show you what's going to change my mind and why I'm not really looking at this as a pullback per se. Now, a lot of words in lingo, right? It's just a matter of what do we mean? So for me, a pullback is something that happens, or a retracement, or even a mean reversion is something that happens within the context of a trend. So first of all, Bitcoin was no longer trending as of the 17th of June. All right, so that's the first thing that I'll note. We lost the trend. Doesn't mean it's a downtrend, but we lost the trend and went into arguably chop, right, on the 17th of June. The next thing that my charts tell me is that on the 18th of June, I printed my first red candle. Now, based on my indicators and the system that I use, the sequence of what I need to see to be a buyer, I cannot buy a red candle on a daily time frame, right? It might find support, great, but it will do so without me. So once we continue to print red candles, the indicator suggests we're typically going to stay rather heavy until we go neutral, yellow, or bullish, green. Now, if I'm looking at the weakness that we're seeing today, we could say that this was pretty much the evolution, if you will, of going from the uptrend to no trend and no trend to red candles. We don't have a downtrend though. So if I were looking at an aggressive type buy, what I would say, and I don't know if you're bullish or bearish, but if I were looking for an aggressive type buy, it probably would be somewhere between 59.7 and 59.6. So somewhere in that area, because I see that I have Darvis support at 59, call it 665. And my daily price movement range kicks in around 60,000 all the way down to about 59,000. So that's a zone that even though it's heavy, if we are going to find support, that would be where we'd find it. And then what I'd like to also see, especially if I'm being aggressive and even considering a buy, again, please know, I'm just showing you analysis. I have zero interest in Bitcoin the way it's moving right now. And by the way, this is going to extend to Coin, to Mara, to BITO, to all those other individual stock symbols that are tethered to this thing, right? So the next thing is we are oversold, so we can reach those levels, maybe starting at 60,000. Things start to get a little bit more interesting as far as either long calls, long the BTC, long calls and BITO, which is just BTC futures contracts. So that's what I would say about that. I have no feelings whatsoever about it. What I see is basically that, right? That's what we're dealing with, and it's going to be pretty heavy until we either reach support and we can attract a bid, or we start to see yellow candles, which we likely won't see until close to about 68 again. So this could be heavy for a little while. Doesn't make it unbuyable. So you might say, well, Rog, what would that look like? Take a peek, because we do have some red candle buy examples. If you're wondering, all right, Rog, I get it. You don't want to be buying red candles. Agreed, but this is what I would look at. Right here. See back in here? Red candles, neutral environment, oversold. So that would actually link to this candle right there. Okay, once again, oversold, red candles, yeah? And then so you're basically looking for something like that again here. And again, we have the oversold. So, there's a pretty good chance if we get there, it might hold. All right, any thoughts on CVX going into a daily short? So again, trade what we see, not what we think. And what I see is weakness. I like the short side, and all my cards on the table. CAD, I am in XLE puts. I am in XLE puts. And it's been a rougher ride than I would have liked, because crude oil had 3 pretty strong sessions up. And because of that, it took XLE, it took those oil stocks with it. But at some point, because crude is in a chop, my expectations are it's going to exhaust, because the primary reason for the movement higher has been as you can see there, the primary reason for the movement higher has been that choppy market bounce in crude. And it's been on a lot of brokerage comments about a lack of supply for summer. Now, why does that matter? Lack of supply. It actually really doesn't. It's going to be a momentary boost, but the real trends in crude, the real backbone of an uptrend would be demand, not a lack of supply. Even if it's a geopolitical lack of supply, we know we get a lot of volatility, but not necessarily a sustained trend. So whenever I hear the reason for any movement in crude is more of a lack of supply narrative, then it's really not something usually that tends to continue unless something else along the lines of a demand narrative start to join the conversation. So I've got XLE, which is Chevron and Exxon for the most part. So that trade has already happened though. So what that means is by trading up into, you can see here, the gold zone of the DPMR, the 21, as you can see, this is called the 21 top tier dots. Those are resistance levels. And then now we're getting follow through to the downside. And if XLE is heading lower, CVX, Exxon should do the same thing, right? So that's the way we're looking at that today. All right. Next up is, what do we have for Amazon? Amazon has been a very discussed stock. I frankly find that a little perplexing, but that's just me. So let me tell you what we've got. We've got a choppy market. And if you're ever dealing with a choppy market, playing momentum in a choppy market is a coin flip and a lot of luck. And I'm all for being lucky. My father-in-law used to have a saying, rather be lucky than good, but I'd rather be both. Lucky and good would be something where the candle touches the daily price movement range, and then we get up towards the resistance of the other end of the daily price movement range, right? So it's had a couple good days, but it's not in a trend. So that move is likely going to be pretty limited, because within the context of the chop, once we get to highs, things start to get pretty heavy for that stock. But on the flip side, if we can see lows, even the red candle variety, which is not my preference, but even those lows into the daily price movement range are much better timed buys. So most traders are going to get in after a move higher. And there's nothing wrong with that. But most traders are going to get their attention on something like Amazon at the 20th, right? They see it take off on the 21st. Maybe there's one more up candle, but I'd be very, very cautious about buying Amazon here. Buying at the highs of an uptrend is a slightly higher probability. It's equally unsavory to me. It's not my preferred way of getting in, but at least the probability of continuation is far higher than buying after strength right here, buying after strength in a chop. All right. So, yeah, hey, bot, so by the way, those of you that may not know, we have updated price movement ranges that will be available. Bot, when are they going to be available? Around lunchtime today? So they'll be posted around lunchtime likely today. So those of you that are price movement range, daily price movement range, hourly price movement range, subscribers, those will be going out later today. So just a quick heads up. So we'll be getting fresh ones. And so these zones are going to change every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But then we also go back, we update based on volatility. So again, remember, these are going to be updated this week. So I'm really looking forward to where these volatility zones will be sitting. But for right now, you get a really good idea of where they sit. And again, please, please, please be cautious here, because it's not quite at, if we're sitting at 191.5, that's likely the end of the ride. But I do want to remind you all that, see this back in here? We're getting very close to being overbought again. So unless the XLY has a rising tide in consumer discretionary, unless the NASDAQ has just a rip higher, that's really the only way Amazon's going to continue at this point, based on what I see on the charts. Okay. So it's very, very late to the party to think of a long position. I don't want to short Amazon. I don't want to be long calls. Let's see. So no update, I think. Oh, yeah, bot, I'm not going to update till they get it too. Yeah, bot's asking, are these the updated ones? I have them right now, but I'll update them once everyone else has them. All right. So yeah, heads up for that. There's usually an email that goes out, and you can check the indicator section of the Simpler Trading website for the fresh batch. All right. So Anthony says, awesome. Yeah, Anthony, heads up for that email. I'll be updating later on today when you all get them. Maybe I'll update between sessions, but we have those fresh out of the oven PMRs coming out. All right. Next up is Freeport-McMoRan. So what do I think about Freeport for a swing trade? To the short side, perhaps. Again, red candles. I don't want to be a buyer in the gray. I'd rather be a long put trader in the gold. But really the determining factor is going to be this. Copper. If copper stays heavy, and copper's pretty heavy right now, copper has gone from what was really a very strong bullish environment for, take a peek, since about the middle of March, right? And then it ended the end of May. And now we're actually getting the first candle where this could be a downtrend. So unless copper can find a bid, and really, if it's going to find a bid, it's probably going to have to do so around that low we saw on June 18. If it can find a bid, great. Then Freeport-McMoRan, which is tethered to that narrative, XME, which is tethered to that narrative, can also bounce. So I would keep an eye on copper, and then I would take a look at Freeport-McMoRan. If we think about the hierarchy of our index sector stock, the index here really is copper. The sector is metals and mining. And then the individual stock would be Freeport. So I would wait to get some clarity on the top of the food chain, and then I think about what to do. But for the most part, yeah, this is going to be a red candle in the gold zone for long puts. All right. Next up is, where would I buy NVIDIA for long term? I don't know, San. So gang, when we're looking at charts together, right? To some folks, long term is a 1 hour chart. To other folks, it might be a daily. To some other folks, it might be a weekly. I don't have anything for a swing on NVIDIA right now. I would like to buy it, but for me, a long-term swing would be simply about 2 to 10 days, maybe to expiration. So we're talking about maybe a week, week and a half. Remember, we're traders for the most part. We're usually not building positions for months, if not years. To me, that's more of a portfolio. To me, that's borderline, almost an investment or a buy and hold, right? So I don't have a buy and hold level for NVIDIA right now. Again, not knowing what long-term means, saying to you, I would say long-term for me is usually a daily time frame for a longer-term swing trade, or the weekly time frame for that portfolio, more of that buy and hold. But at the moment, I don't have a level that I'm loving yet. Maybe 110, but I don't have a level in NVIDIA that's really wowing me right now for a longer-term swing. All right. So I hope that, yeah, I love the long side though, right? I do like the long side, San. I love the long side. So I totally agree with you there. It's just, how much of a pullback do I want to see? Some of that, I think we go back to NQ and say, all right, well, if the NQ is going to pull back, which it might, and if that influences semiconductors, which it might, then I'm going to, again, take that top-down look, San. So NASDAQ, SMH, which I did a whole video on Friday. SMH, I know there's a whole generation that thinks SMH is shaking my head. SMH is semiconductor ETF. So I'll keep an eye on NASDAQ, semiconductor ETF, SMH, and then I'll get down to the individual stock. Now, it may not be NVIDIA. It might be Qualcomm, might be Taiwan Semi. But once we know our time horizon specifically, that's either going to direct me to a swing trade on the 1 hour, which is short term, swing trade on the daily, which is slightly longer term, or maybe a buy and hold on the weekly. All right, gang, as always, thanks so much for being here. I will see you all tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. As always, get those questions in early. I just take them first come, first serve. Until then, be good to each other.